It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Rico Brogna! How we all doing? Welcome into episode number 514 of Rico Brogna. The first thing I kind of want to ask, it's a question, it's a rhetorical question, but not really. I guess it's a question that you can interpret however you want. Saturday, July 19th, 2025. Of course, the day where David Wright had his number 5 retired, and then the New York Mets proceeded to crap all over themselves and lose a game that mirrored the night before, 5-2, in which they left a small country on base. If you were at Citi Field, one of the 42,000 people there, or you consumed the game on TV, was Saturday, July 19th a good day, or was it a crappy day? Because Pete Hoffman was at Citi Field, as was I. And the first thing he said to me before we started this Rico Brogna, so now we may as well do it on the podcast, was, hey, that was a great day. And I'm like, great day? That day sucked. And he said, well, but the ceremony was great. The ceremony was great. And we'll spend time on that and the honoring of David Wright and the ridiculous traffic that everybody hit who was going to Citi Field. But then we're going to spend time on this team. And while the ceremony was great, and that's something we'll remember for a very long time, the feeling I had walking out of Citi Field at about 7:30 on a Saturday night was a feeling of disgust. And I wasn't alone, because I heard more than any other night I've been at Citi Field this season and even last year, really the last 4 years, this was the most boos I had heard in one night at Citi Field. Because the Met fan is sick. The Met fan is disgusted by what we've witnessed for well over a month. It's basically been a few months if you want to talk about mediocrity. I mean, really ever since the hot start in which they reached their pinnacle of being, 21 games above 500, this has been a bad to mediocre team for a long time. And Met fans at Citi Field, right after they teared up and gave David Wright 800 standing ovations, Met fans were disgusted. So as I sit here right now and we record this Rico Brogna late on Saturday night, a few hours after they did lose to the Cincinnati Reds for the second straight day, I'm sorry, Pete. It was not a great day. It was a disgusting day.
Well, I understand where you're coming from. You know, there was two halves to this day, though. There really were, because the first half to what I witnessed was awesome. It was emotional. It was a celebration that I've never seen before, because, I mean, you could talk about like the recent, retirements and stuff like that. This was the biggest and the best celebration that the Mets have ever put on in my existence, in my opinion.
Well,
it was that great.
I'm going to agree with you and disagree with you all at the same time. So when you think about Doc Gooden and Darryl Strawberry and Keith Hernandez and Jerry Koosman and Mike Piazza, Tom Seaver had his number retired in 1988. I was way too young to understand what was going on. And let's put Willie Mays, Casey Stengel, Gil Hodges in a different perspective in terms of their number retirement. This was very, very unique, not because the ceremony was extra special, not because they did anything that was far different than what they did for Doc, Darryl, or Keith Hernandez, because it all was very similar. The difference, and I was talking to my dad about this, is that David Wright is a career New York Met. And all those other guys, every other person who's had their number retired, there's a story attached to them on why they're not career New York Mets. In the case of Doc Gooden, it was a drug problem. And it was the Mets at that time in 1994 basically dumping him, saying, you know what, we're not going to give you another chance. And so his story continued with the Yankees of all teams. Darryl Strawberry left as a free agent. Wasn't all on him. We all know about Frank Cashin and what he offered Darryl or didn't offer Darryl. So there's a story there. Jerry Koosman, Tom Seaver were traded away. And there's a backstory to why, but they didn't finish their careers with the New York Mets. It's just the facts. Keith Hernandez, Mike Piazza, great players who we acquire in the middle of their career. So nothing negative necessarily about that, but they're not career New York Mets. And what's so unique about David Wright, and my dad certainly felt this as somebody that's watched all of those guys that I mentioned, not just part of their careers the way I have and you have, but all of those guys, was that he even said to me, he's like, there's something really unique about David Wright, that there is no caveat. There's no caveat. There's no, yeah, then he left as a free agent, or yeah, then they traded him, or yeah, he was great and we got him in the middle of his career, but maybe his best years were in LA with the Dodgers. I'm not talking about anyone particularly other than Mike Piazza. You know what I mean? Same thing with Keith Hernandez. Like, yeah, Keith was a great Met. Was he a better St. Louis Cardinal? We don't have to have those debates with David Wright. So I think what made this so emotional, and it was, I totally agree, and so special, is this is so rare for us as Met fans to have somebody who spent their entire career with the same team. The what if with David Wright isn't the what if of him leaving as a free agent or him being traded away. The what if is obviously the back injury that shortened his career and what could have been if he played in 2016, 2017, 2018. I brought my son Jet to this game as well. As I was explaining to him, yeah, so David played one game after you were born. And that game was his return game, which was the first thing David mentioned in his speech. He talked about how special it was to have that one game at the end of 2018. And so I was explaining to Jet, yeah, back injury really ended his career. He came back for one last day, and that was the only time he played while you were alive, since Jet's, how old is he now? 8 years old. And so he then asked a great follow-up question. He said, if David never got hurt, would he still be playing today? And I said, no, but his contract was going to run out in 2020. So is it conceivable that David Wright played in 2021? Not crazy at all. I mean, could a guy play into his 40s or in that case, his late 30s? Absolutely. So I think that question, and then thinking about the what if on David Wright's health, and would things have been different in that wild card game in 2016 if he was healthy? Would things have been different in 17 where they got off to or 18 where they got off to the great start, then collapsed in May? Would it have been different? Would it have been different in 2019 when they were actually a good team? And so those what ifs you wonder about, but the fact that he's a career Met did make this very special. And I admit all the other number retirements, including Mike Piazza, this one was more special.
Well, also, too, I don't remember how long it took for them to retire Piazza's number. I forget when he retired. First of all, he left the Mets and still had a career for a couple more years. David Wright, he retired in 2018. This is 7 years later, right? This is still fresh in many fans' memories. So the fact that this wasn't like we're celebrating somebody from almost 40 years ago when they won a World Series almost 40 years ago. This is still in our back pocket,
It's actually, believe it or not, years-wise, very similar because they retired Mike's number in 2016, and I think his career ended in 7 or 8, and the Mets specifically waited for Mike to get elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame before they retired his number. So actually, it was similar in amount of years later. Obviously, David played the one game in 2018. So if you do that math, it's been 7 years. In Piazza's case, his last game as a Met was 2005. So in terms of last time he was a Met, then it's a longer number because then you're talking about 11 years. But the thing about Mike, and it's not to take anything away from Mike Piazza, he's a great Met. He's got a club named after him at Citi Field. Obviously, we all love Mike Piazza, but he was an acquired superstar. And so when Mike became a Met, we already knew he was great. And we already knew it. We saw his resume. We knew what he was. Same thing with Lindor, same thing with Soto. In the case of David Wright, and I pulled it out right in front of me. I'm holding something in my hands. I'm going to show it to the YouTube audience. What do you see? You see a scorecard, right, Pete?
I do see a scorecard. I'm curious. When is that scorecard from?
That scorecard is from July 21st, 2004. In which I wrote down with 2 stars next to it, David Wright makes Major League Baseball debut. David Wright was batting 7th that day, playing third base, and he fouled out in his first at-bat, and he got robbed. Like the backup, the catcher for the Expos made a great play because I wrote AP next to it, which means amazing play. The catcher who made that amazing play is Brian Schneider, who would go on and play for the Mets a few years later. But the reason I say that is not to brag about my scorecard from July of 2004, but what makes David Wright special is that we saw his beginning. We saw his major league debut when he went 0 for 4. We saw his first major league hit, and we saw his last major league hit. And that doesn't mean like I don't like acquiring superstars. It doesn't mean that trading and extending Francisco Lindor wasn't great or signing Juan Soto wasn't great. It just means there's always going to be something just a little bit more special to the guy you witnessed, that you nurtured as a fan, the guy that you were reading in Baseball Weekly as our top prospect. I can't wait to see him. And then come up, become a major leaguer, and see their entire careers. And I hope that Pete Alonso, who was watching, and he's watched a few, he watched Darryl and Doc as well. And so he was able to see the ceremony for Darryl Strawberry, a guy who decided to leave, and a ceremony for for David Wright, a guy who decided to stay. And hopefully as Pete watches this, he realizes that while the Mets need to give him money, obviously he's not going to work here at a major, major discount, but you see how special it is to be a career New York Met. Couple of things. I left early to go to the game. I think anyone who went to this ceremony left early to go to the game. I have never seen, and I've gone to World Series game, playoff game, tons of all-star games. I don't know if I've ever seen traffic getting into Citi Field as bad as it was for Saturday's game, to the point where I was nervous I was going to miss the beginning of the ceremony. I made all my little tricks trying to skip traffic, all my tricks to get to the parking lot, and it was all failing. And I finally pulled in the lot at about 3:05. And remember, or maybe you don't remember, I don't know how many people saw it, but the Mets put out hey, sit in your seat by 3:15. So my entire drive, 3:15 was that number. Like, I got to get there by 3:15. If we're not there by 3:15, we're going to miss it. So we probably, me, my son, and my father, 3 generations of Roberts, ran into our seat, I'd say by 3:11. And I sat down. I was like, all right, we're good. Okay, 3:11, we made it. And then they proceeded to not start the ceremony for 25 more minutes. And I'm not mad about it. I think, and I don't know this for sure, but I'm almost surmising that the Mets knew a lot of people are having a tough time getting into the parking lots and getting into the building. Let's just push this back 15 minutes, which obviously pushed back the start time about 15 minutes because the game, which was scheduled to start at 4:10, started at 4:30. So I don't know if it was done on purpose, but I'm not the only one who dealt with it. I heard from plenty of people that the traffic, they experienced the same issue. The traffic was just horrendous. But thank goodness, I assume most of us made it, because once that ceremony started at about 3:35, whenever they finally pulled the trigger, there was not an empty seat. And I think back to some of these other ceremonies that the Mets have had over the last 5 years when they've decided, hey, let's retire a lot of numbers, from Kuzman to Hernandez to Darryl to Doc. There have been empty seats. And a big deal was made last year about Doc Gooden and the empty seats for that. And I remember saying this at the time on the Rico. You go back to the archives. David Wright and this generation is different than Darryl, Doc, and Kuzman. And it's not a knock on them. It's just a reminder that it was a long time ago. I mean, I'm in my 40s now. I'm 42 years old. I turned 42 a couple of weeks ago or a week ago, whenever the hell it was. I didn't see Doc Gooden in the 80s. 84 Doc, I was 1. 85 Doc, I was 2. When they won it all in 86, that still gets lionized, I was 3. I don't remember it. I didn't see any of it. And I'm in my early 40s, which means, obviously, if you're listening and you're older than me, you're like, shut up, man. I remember it. It was great. And not taking it away from anybody. It's just a reminder that when you have ceremonies for Doc, Darryl, and Keith, the mid to late 80s, you got to be 45 or older to remember it. And there's a lot of Met fans who are just not. And they appreciate the history. I appreciate the history. But you're going to get more of a reaction for the guy who more people in the percentage of Met fans were actually able to see. It was also bizarre how when David started talking, it started raining. It rained out of absolute nowhere, and Howie Rose made the joke, don't worry, it's not rain, it's just God crying, or whatever he said, or the world is crying out of emotion for David Wright. But that was bizarre, how all of a sudden it just starts raining out of nowhere as David Wright starts talking. There were rumors over the last few days. I was actually on with Big Mac, Chris McMonagle, who does a great job doing the Saturday morning show, the old slot I used to have. And he asked me about these rumors that at some point during the ceremony, they were going to announce Francisco Lindor as team captain. And I did not like the idea. Now, you want to name Francisco Lindor the team captain, fine, even though he's 0 for his last million at this point and left a country on base. Don't worry, we'll get to all that crap coming up. But my gut was I wasn't going to like that when you're honoring David Wright. But I admitted to Big Mac, if they did it and they pulled it off tastefully, I probably would have thought it was awesome as it was happening. But I'm glad they didn't do it because there's no reason to do that. If the Mets are going to name Francisco Lindor captain, do it in spring training. You don't have to make a spectacle of it in the middle of July. And also, as he's in the middle of this massive slump, and he actually heard some boos in this game, was it really going to make sense to name him team captain? So I'm glad that they didn't do it. If they want to make him team captain someday, we talked about this earlier on the Rico in spring training. I got no problem with it. It's fine. But what does it really mean? Does it mean something? Is it going to change the way Francisco Lindor acts? Is it going to change anything? Probably not. Now let's get to this team. Let's get to the here and now with this Met team. This was absolutely disgusting, this game too. And we'll get to game one as well. And we'll do the big series recap for episode 515, which we'll post sometime Sunday night. But everything about this Saturday game, reminded me of Friday's game. They get an early run on the RBI hit by Mark Vientos, which was nice because Vientos closed the first half on such a strong note that you're actually hopeful, at least I'm hopeful, okay, maybe he can build off of that. Didn't really do that in Friday night's game. But you get the RBI single by Vientos. You get the home run by Brett Beatty. And you're feeling good. You're feeling like, all right, the Mets have a chance to erase kind of the errors of their ways from the night before. But what we would see in this game is the absolute garbage fundamentals and the little things that they did wrong that allowed Cincinnati to not only come back, tie the game, and take the lead, but give them just enough cushion for this limp, you-know-what offense to not be able to respond to. Go to the third inning of this game. Clay Holmes gets through the first two. He's got a 2-0 lead. God knows the Mets are going to need more runs, but as we've seen from this offense many times, they can score a couple of runs early and then go to sleep. He gives up the leadoff double to Jake Fraley, which stinks, whatever. By the way, when he gave up that double, I don't think it was actually this double. It was the double later in the game that Fraley hit that drove in Tyler Stevenson from first base. There was a great debate between the people behind me if Juan Soto ran quick enough to field the ball in right field, if he was lollygagging it or he was hustling hard enough. But either way, Holmes gives up the leadoff double to Jake Fraley. He hits Marte, which is what you can't do with the 8 and 9 hitters, and you set up this 2-on nobody out spot for TJ Friedel. And then you've got Luis Torrens, who, listen, Luis Torrens had a nice offensive game, so this is probably not the best day when talking about a Torrens error to remind everybody that he's a 216 hitter, because he did have a really good day at the plate, which I'll spend some time on later. But if you're Luis Torrens, the last thing you can do with 2-on and nobody out is try to throw behind Marte on first base and airmail it in the right field. You are playing because of your defense. That's why you're on the field. That's why Francisco Alvarez is tearing up AAA and out in the major leagues, because you're so good defensively that we'll live with your 212 batting average. We'll be okay with it. The fact that you've driven in 15 runs all season long. You can't make that mistake. And it wasn't a play that was on because TJ Friedel was showing bunt. It was Terrens trying to be too cute. And if you're going to throw down, you cannot airmail it and cost yourself 2 bases both ways. Because now what you've done to Clay Holmes, who is still a work in progress, and I got a few things I'll say about Clay Holmes later as well, is you can't make life more difficult than it already is. There's 2 on and nobody out. Friedel is showing bunt for crying out loud, and Terrens is airmailing to right field, which all of a sudden, and I thought that play changed the entire game. Because 2-0, 2 on, nobody out. First of all, you may get out of it. There's no guarantee you're giving up a run or both runs, but maybe you give up a run, you get out of it up 2-1. Once you airmail it, and now it's 2-1, runner on third, less than 2 outs, the chances of you getting out of this inning without giving up you've already given up a run, but getting out of it without the Reds taking tying the game is greatly diminished. And that was a killer, too, because Clay made a big pitch against Friedel to get him to ground out to Alonso to hold the runner at third, and then he's ahead of Matt McLain 0-2. What a pain in the ass Matt McLain has been in this series. It's the home run on Friday night, gets a double on Friday night, draws a walk on Friday night. Meanwhile, Matt McLain's hitting .213 this season, and behind the count 0-2, rips a base hit past Lindor. Absolute killer sequence. The Terrens error, which hands the Reds a run and puts the tying run 90 feet away, and then Holmes not being able to put McLain away, a .215 hitter, went ahead of the count 0-2. And if that's not bad enough, the 4th inning was another killer because there's 2 outs on a runner on first with 7, 8, and 9 coming up. And Holmes gives up a base hit to Stevenson and a base hit to Fraley. And the Reds take the lead. And from 2-0 to 3-2. And oh, by the way, where the hell's the Met offense? Ronnie Mauricio, who had a Ronnie Mauricio basically won the net negative award for the Rico in 1 game. But then again, Francisco Lindor is giving him major competition because he can't get a base hit and he's left the country on base. But think about Ronnie Mauricio's Saturday. The man who is playing the position of the man of the hour, David Wright. Bases loaded, 2 outs in the first inning, chance to break the game open right out of the gate. McNeil draws a walk. Mauricio's got the count 2-0, rolls one over to second base, leaves 3 guys on base. Strikes out in the 4th, strikes out incredibly meekly in the 6th inning with the leadoff man on. And then right after the Mets are given a gift late in this game, on the Marte error in the 8th inning. First pitch, he grounds into a double play. And I'll tell you this, he heard it. Of all the guys that heard boos in game 2 of this series on Saturday, and they all did. I mean, who didn't hear boos on Saturday? This was an angry crowd. It was an angry crowd because A, there was a ton of traffic. B, the prices were crazy. C, you were just remembering and reminiscing on good times with David Wright. And then D, am I up to D? I don't even know what letter I'm up to. D or Q or R, the team has sucked for a month. So I think when you add all that together, you had Lindor getting booed, 0 for 5 with 3 strikeouts. You had Ronnie Mauricio hearing it after the 2 strikeouts and the double play. This was beyond pathetic, but look at this offense. They score that run in the first inning I mentioned on the RBI hit by Vientos. They get the home run by Brett Beatty. 2 on, 2 out in the 4th. Nimmo flies out in a big spot. Runner on second, 1 out in the 5th. Alonso grounds out. Vientos flies out. They load up the bases with 1 out in the 6th. That was a golden opportunity in the 6th inning. And Brandon Nimmo strikes out, and Lindor shatters his bat and hits the ground ball to first base. And then obviously the 9th inning, when they yet again had another great opportunity to come back in this game, Juan Soto strikes out. And I do want to get into that Juan Soto at bat. So obviously the foul home run stinks. I don't have an issue with Carlos Mendoza asking the umpires to take a look at it, even though it was clearly foul. Our good friend Dan, who emails the pod a lot, said, hey, that was basically giving the Cincinnati Reds a timeout. Like, why would you do that? It gives them a chance, and it gives Emilio Pagan, the closer, a chance to take a deep breath. I don't necessarily agree with that, Dan, because I think you could twist that however you want. Like, if Soto ends up coming through, we could look at asking the umpires to take a look at the non-home run as the opposite and say, oh, see, it made Pagan stand there and wait, and it affected him. So I don't think there's any good or bad to that. I think it's just one of those spots where, hey, it's the ninth inning. It's probably foul, but you never know. Have them take a look. So I don't buy that gave Cincinnati any kind of edge. As far as the timeout that was called, I went back and watched it. Bottom line is Tyler Stevenson puts his hands up for a timeout with 1 on the pitch clock. So we could sit here and bitch about it all we want. That was a legal timeout. It was a smart play because I don't know if Pagan was going to get the pitch off before the clock hit 0. So he stole him a timeout. He stole him a chance to go after Soto. And look, here's the problem. Soto checked his swing enough or didn't check his swing enough where it's a 50-50 call. So what are we bitching about? What we should bitch about is 0 for 4. Juan Soto was 0 for 4. Francisco Lindor was 0 for 5. After Nimmo got the hit in the first inning, what did he do the rest of the game? 0 for 3 with a walk. Pete Alonso, 1 for 5. Their best production in this game offensively came from their 8 and 9 hitters in Beatty and Terrens, who got on base 6 times in 8 plate appearances. That's a great thing. I mean, to get production out of the bottom half of this order, which they have not done a lot, is a great thing, but the big boys did nothing. The big boys crapped the pants. How many times has Juan Soto come up in a spot in which we're all thinking to ourselves, boy, this has a chance to be his Met moment? How many times? He's had a bunch of them. And he has basically never come through. I mean, let's just call it like it is. I know his overall numbers are very good, and he has a chance to hit more home runs this season with the Mets than he even did hit last year with the Yankees, which was a career high. His numbers are fine, but his lack of clutch hitting is obvious. You don't need me to sit here and tell you what the numbers are because, trust me, they do suck, but your eye test will tell you everything. And I'm not just picking on him. I'll pick on everybody. Who you want to get to next? Want to get to Lindor, who hasn't had a hit in about a month? And not only does he take an 0 for 5, how bad were his at-bats? I mean, his 9th inning at-bat was his best one. Got the count full 3-2 and hit a ball pretty hard. And Spencer Steer made a pretty good play, almost turning a 3-6-3 double play. How about the rest of his at-bats? Shattering his bat in the 6th inning and not being able to get out of the box, basically. Striking out in the 5th, striking out in the 2nd, striking out in the 1st. You're damn right you're not naming him captain right now. Again, doesn't mean he's not a captain, but I mean, he's a mess. And so as I'm watching this game and watching the slow death of this David Wright day, and they do go on to lose 5-2, all I could think about is how this season is starting to feel like last year in reverse. You know, I remember last year when the Mets turned their season around, and we were all so happy, and July rolls around and August rolls around. One of the great arguments in talking about how good the Mets were was to say, hey, look at their record since. And when you cited the Met record since, and I forget the date from last year that you want to use as the line of demarcation, June 2nd, whatever it was, the day that the big fat purple guy from McDonald's showed up. You know, whatever the date is, they had the best record in baseball. So we would sit here in September and say, hey, June, July, August, for 3.5 months, they're the best team in baseball. And it was a great argument, right? It was a great kind of showing that the Mets are better than what their record says. Remember that? Well, here we are in late July, and I can do the same damn thing except the other way. This is a 500 team in their last 76 games. Now, we could look at their last 30 games and just say they suck because they're 10-20 in their last 30 games. We could do that. Or you can go all the way back to, after sweeping the Philadelphia Phillies, and say they're a 500 team. So all those arguments that were used to kind of buoy the fact that the Mets are good, see, they're good, look at their record since this date, their record since that date, we are now entering a universe in which there is a greater sample size of games that tells us the Mets are a mediocre team than the team that currently sits 11 games above 500, which, hey, it's 11 games above 500. Ain't that good? Well, I got news for you. 11 games above 500 is not going to be enough to make the postseason this year. It's just not. Finishing, I'm going to try to do the math here on this, 86 and 76, because that is 10 games above 500, and that does add up to 162 games. It's not going to be good enough. I don't think it is. I could be wrong, I guess. I don't think it will be. So they've got to start playing better, and we thought they were. The great weekend against the Yankees. Here we go. Things are looking good. They even win 2 out of 3 against Kansas City. And the reality is, there's been a mediocre team for a while, and it's the same damn issues. 1 for 11 with runners in scoring position, an offense that continues to basically underachieve all year, and then maybe the biggest issue, and it's 2 issues that are connected. Their starting pitching doesn't go deep enough into games, and you become overly reliant on your bullpen. So on Saturday's game, the bullpen, for the most part, did a pretty good job. Outside of Reed Garrett, who gave up that double to Jake Fraley, the bullpen goes out and got 11 outs. But it is continuously unsustainable to ask for 11 outs out of your bullpen every single game. And Clay Holmes is putting himself in a position, and we're going to do a trade deadline show in a week. On Thursday, when the Mets have an off day, we'll go in depth. We'll bring up a ton of different names, a ton of different options on what David Stearns needs to do, should do, all that coming up next week. But I'll give you a little thumbnail. The idea, and I know, Hoff, you brought this up in spring training, and I said, just let it play out, and we'll have a better idea in July. It's on the table that Clay Holmes goes back to the bullpen. I'm not saying it's a guarantee. I'm not screaming from my lungs that it has to happen, because the only way it happens is based on what they do at the deadline. They are in no position to just do it now. Unless all of a sudden David Stearns is at a come to Jesus moment where he's going to call up his top prospects and let young pitchers start. But if they're able to acquire, let's say, a Mitch Keller at the trade deadline, well, you've strengthened 2 things at the same time. You've added to your rotation, and dare I say, a guy that can get through the freaking 6th inning, and you made your bullpen better. And for anyone who wonders about how Clay Holmes would react to it, it's very simple. Clay Holmes signed a multi-year deal. You put your arm around them and say, the circumstances of this season and this trade deadline has led to us making this decision for the final 2 months of the regular season and the postseason if the Mets make it. And next year, back in the rotation. Because I don't think Clay Holmes is a failed starting pitcher. If the Mets could score more runs, if the Mets had other starting pitchers that could go deep into games, if the Mets had a deeper bullpen, then pitching into the 6th inning on a consistent basis would be okay. You know what I mean? Like, it would be sustainable based on other things around him being different. A deeper bullpen, more arms in the rotation that can go deep into games, and an offense that isn't sitting there averaging 4.3 runs per game. If those things were better, and we thought they'd be better, or maybe we hoped they'd be better, then maybe you wouldn't have to sit there and have the discussion or the thought of Clay Holmes going to the bullpen. But it's every freaking game. Let me go to Friday's game real quick. I'll save that. We don't have to break that down in the recap edition. I'll do it right now. Sean Manaea was fine. Like, was his pitch count a little high for 4 innings? Sure. But the fact that they had to pull him after 4 innings in a game in which they led 2-1, again, very similar to Saturday's game, score the 2 runs early, run in the first, run in the second. Basically, the home run came early in Friday's game, Juan Soto. The RBI single came in the 2nd inning, Jeff McNeil, the opposite of what they did on David Wright Day. But asking your starting pitching or asking your bullpen to come in after 4 innings from Sean Manaea, again, unsustainable. What made Friday so aggravating, that's the word I'd use, is not only was I pissed tired after getting off a flight from Milan that I wasn't sure I was going to make, but why, if you're Carlos Mendoza coming out of the All-Star break, are you going to Alex Carrillo in the 5th inning of a 1-run game? And might I ask you this, Mr. Manager? After he gives up a home run to Matt McClain, a 2-run home run that turns a 2-1 game upside down and makes it 3-2, why are you running him out there in the 6th inning? Another question, Mr. Manager. After you run him out there in the 6th inning and he gives up another home run, this time to Austin Hayes, why are you letting him remain in the game? After he walks Spencer Steer, why are you letting him remain in the game? Even after he gives up the home run to Tyler Stevenson, he's freaking 3rd home run he gave up. How are you leaving him in the game? This is Alex Carrillo. He's not a major leaguer in all likelihood. He's a great story. It's a wonderful story, but you're coming out of the All-Star break with a fresh bullpen. And you're not only going to Carrillo in the 5th inning of a 1-run game, you're letting him stay in there because you're so desperate to steal outs. And the same crap with Brandon Waddell. When he walks the bases loaded, you keep him in the game. When he gives up an RBI hit after giving up a leadoff double in the 7th, you keep him in the game. That was, I hate the word punts. Like that's a punt game. That's a punt lineup. Carlos Mendoza managed his bullpen like he gave up in the 5th inning. That's how he managed it. I've seen Mendy do a bunch of things that I don't like this year. I've seen him do a bunch of things that you guys don't like, but I don't mind it, and I'll defend him. What happened on Friday, I'm sorry, was indefensible. Now, is that all on Carlos Mendoza? No, the Met offense again goes to sleep after scoring 2 runs in the first 2 innings. Where the hell were they? They made Nick Lodolo look like Cy Young, and they don't rally until it's way too late. They literally don't rally until 2 outs and nobody on in the 9th inning of a game in which they're trailing 8-2. That's when they rallied. Before that, they hadn't put a runner in scoring position since the 2nd inning when Jeff McNeil came through with a base hit with runners in scoring position. So it's not simply just Carlos Mendoza. Some of this is David Stearns. Like, here's my knock on David Stearns. If you're going to have a restrictive pitch count on Sean Manaea, and Gary Cohen sort of brought this up late in the game when the game got out of hand. I don't know how many people heard it. Maybe you piggyback 2 pitchers like you did on Sunday with Holmes and Manaea. Like, I didn't hate that. I know it ultimately didn't work, but I didn't hate that at all. Like, if you know Sean Manaea is going to have a pitch count restriction of 65, 66, 67, how about you call up one of your young prospects to maybe piggyback him instead of relying on Alex Carrillo and Brandon Waddell? By the way, Brandon Waddell was already sent down. So there are a lot of things that are wrong right now. Friday night, Mendy's bullpen management was wrong. Friday and Saturday, the offense scoring a few runs early and then going to sleep the rest of the game was wrong. Francisco Lindor can't buy a hit. That is wrong right now. The bullpen is incredibly inconsistent. It was good on Saturday. It was not good on Friday. But then again, it wasn't good on Friday because look at who they were going to is wrong. And their inability to get length out of their starting pitching. So there's a lot of bad stuff. And to jump back to Saturday's game, then you throw in the defense. I mentioned Luis Torrenz's bad throw in which he's trying a little pickoff move with 2 on and nobody out. The Ronnie Mauricio non-turn of the double play in the 6th inning, that was another absolute killer. You have got to turn that double play. I mean, Ronnie, if you want to remain in the major leagues, and I'm not sure how much longer he's going to last, you have got to turn that double play. And he's lucky he got 1 out. Brett Beatty made a really good play to save him of what would have been a disastrous error. Not a lot of good stuff. Alvarez, let me address this real quick. So I was reading a story during the All-Star break how because Alvarez entered the year with 2 years and 6 days of Major League service time, and not to get into the weeds on this, that the Mets, by having him in the minor leagues, have saved another year of service time. Even if Alvarez was called up yesterday or today and never sent to the minors again, he will finish 2028, just a few days shy of the 6 years required to reach free agency. I think this was from The Athletic, so good job by them. So they've already stolen a year out of Francisco Alvarez, and I don't think that's why he was sent down. It was more just interesting that that's one of the ramifications of him being sent down. And I know he's been sent down for his defense, and his defense needs to be better. I acknowledge that, and Mendy has acknowledged that it's looked better. They're going to need his offense. The Mets are in a spot right now where they got to call him up because they need the offense. Now, Terrenz had a good game on Saturday. He had that incredible 12-pitch at-bat that turned into a walk that got spoiled by Brandon Nimmo swinging for the fences and striking out, Lindor having the broken back round out. But that's one game. You know, he got on base 3 times. Great job out of him. But for the most part, they're basically running with a pitcher spot in the Luis Terrenz spot. So I think they are going to face pressure now to call up Francisco Alvarez just to add a spark to this offense, because they need it. I mean, I'm sitting there right now wondering what's their biggest problem. They got a lot of problems. Guy sitting next to me said, what should they do at the trade deadline? I said, they got to do a lot of things. I mean, right now, pick your flaw. It's like a trivia game. It's like a game show. Pick the biggest flaw of the New York Mets. Go ahead. What do you want to say it is? Want to say it's the starting pitching not going deep enough in the games? Can't argue. Want to say it's not having enough reliable arms out of the bullpen? Can't argue. You want to say flat out it's the offense? They don't score enough runs? How could you argue that? Doing a lot of things wrong. By the way, here's a geeky clerical email about scorekeeping from Addison. Addison writes, Evan and Pete, watching the game on Saturday, I took the screenshot of the MLB app box score in the top of the 9th inning. They have 5 runs and 4 earned for Clay Holmes tonight. But I scored the game like Evan, and I have the 5th run being scored by Tyler Stevenson from the Fraley double. Reed Garrett pitched to Stevenson, so how is that run charged to Clay Holmes? Don't even get me started on how the Terrenz error led to only 1 earned run, but clearly that 5th run goes to Garrett. No? Love the pod. Hopefully I didn't miss something. Addison, I'm going to tell you a story. So for many years scoring games, I made the same mistake that you made. And I finally realized the error of my ways more recently than you could imagine, considering I've been scoring games since I was, 7 years old or 8 years old when it started. So I take you back to the 6th inning. Clay Holmes walks the leadoff hitter, Austin Hayes, starts the 6th inning with a pitch count of 77. I had no problem with that. Again, you could call it and say, 5 innings, 3 runs, 2 earned, let's call it a day. His pitch count 77. I mean, you got to, and you're looking after a very quick 1-2-3 inning, an economical 1-2-3 inning. You're thinking good about Clay, and you're thinking, hey, maybe I gave 3 outs out of him. He walks Austin Hayes, gets Gavin Lux to ground out, and then gives up that absolutely cheap infield hit to Spencer Steer, head of the count 0-2, swinging bunt base hit. So he leaves with 2 on and 1 out. Reed Garrett induces the ground ball to third base. That could be a double play, because at this point there's 1st and 3rd, 1 out. And that's when Mauricio makes the bad throw. Even though Garrett faced Stevenson, because Stevenson reached on a fielder's choice in which the guy who was out was the Clay Holmes batter, Clay Holmes is still responsible for Tyler Stevenson because he reached on a fielder's choice. And so even though in your box score or your scorecard, the way I have it too, it looks like Reed Garrett gave up the run, he did not give up the run because the batter reached on a fielder's choice. So for 97% of the audience who found that boring, I apologize. But it is a weird one, and it's one that I admit, Addison, you should not feel bad about. I'm telling you, it was like 15 years ago. So I was older. I was in my 30s, in which I realized, I was like, wait a second. Who's that run charged to? But it is charged to Clay Holmes, so that is not a mistake on the MLB app. And that final line for Clay, it's not indicative of the way he pitched. 5 1/3 innings, 5 runs, 4 earned. That does not sound good. 9 base runners in 5 1/3 innings. Again, not good. But the reality is, and this is a consistent thing with Clay, he's good, but how far can you push him? And then when he leaves with guys on base, it now becomes the responsibility of that reliever that came in to keep his line looking good. Reed Garrett turns a double play. Clay Holmes' final line is 5 1/3 innings, 3 runs, 2 earned. But because Reed Garrett, or really because Ronnie Mauricio makes a terrible throw, and then Reed Garrett gives up that double to Jake Fraley, in which the debate behind me was, did Soto hustle enough to get to that baseball? That turns Holmes' performance into something that's a little bit of a stinker. So Reed Garrett didn't do a great job. Brooks Raley did, and that was great to see. I think that's one of the big positives that come out of Saturday's game, that maybe the Mets actually may have a reliable lefty reliever. Let's not forget how good Raley was before he had Tommy John surgery, but he makes his full return, and it wasn't easy. He's facing the top of the Cincinnati Reds order and gets Friedel, McClain, and De La Cruz 1, 2, 3 with 2 strikeouts. That was awesome. Ryan Stanek with a good inning. And even Chris Davinsky. I give Hoff credit for that. Remember back in spring training, you made the case for Chris Davinsky. And for a while, he was on that train up and down between AAA. He's actually now very, very safe and, dare I say, slowly entering the circle of trust.
I mean, I remember him for years with the Astros.
Yep.
And he performed well. And so, like, some of these guys, when they have that history, they have these, especially with bullpen arms, they have these like resurgent years, for renaissance years, for like one more year. So it's good to see that he's performing. But again, at what point in time is he going to fall back to where he's been in the minors? You just don't know with bullpen arms. That's really what it comes down to.
Well, think about the state of the Met bullpen. So they have one lefty now in Brooks Raley, who, jury's out, but he was a good Met prior to the Tommy John surgery. You've got Reed Garrett, who has not been nearly as good as he was to start the season. You've got Alex Carrillo, who's going to be sent down any day. You've got Huascar Brazaban, who for the most part has been bad for about a month and a half. You've got Edwin Diaz, another planet. He's awesome. They just added Kevin Herget, who they had earlier this season, DFA'd, and they got him back. So he'll be released relatively soon. And then you've got the up and down Ryan Stanek, who sometimes is good, but most times sucks. And then you got Chris Davinsky. Like, you do not have a lot of reliable guys in their bullpen. And I said, we'll do this next week. We're going to go extensive on the trade deadline. But right off the top, the most impactful move they could make is acquiring a reliable starting pitcher like Mitch Keller and moving Clay Holmes to the bullpen. And again, that doesn't mean he's a failure. It just means I'm looking at this team. I'm looking at this roster. And I'm looking at their flaws. And we just went through the 3 big flaws. They're not scoring enough runs. They don't have enough reliable arms in the bullpen. They don't get length from their starters. Acquiring a starter that goes deep into games like a Mitch Keller cures 2 of those 3 things. Because not only do you add a starter that can go deeper into games, you take a guy who now you basically add, I hate to say this, as a trade deadline acquisition, as a top reliever. And so, I know you brought this up in March, and what I remember saying to you then was, let's just take a deep breath, and we'll reevaluate mid-July, depending on team need and depending on the way he's pitched. And I think those 2 things are now lining up to where I'm not moving Clay Holmes to the bullpen tomorrow. I'm saying if you could acquire one of these really solid, because they're not really good, they're really solid starting pitchers, with Mitch Keller being kind of like the number 1 name that makes the most sense, well then, yes, I'd move Clay Holmes to the bullpen. Then I would be all in on that's best for this team right now.
And this is kind of more towards the trade deadline podcast we're going to do. But realistically, when you break down this team right now, who do you see pitching in the playoffs? And a lot of these bullpen arms that they have are not pitching. And on top of that, some of these starting pitchers they have are not going to get real innings in the playoffs. So you kind of have to make that move and put Clay Holmes in the bullpen.
Well, eventually Sean Manaea is going to have to go deeper into games, but I will admit that in the 2 appearances we've seen from Manaea, he's looked very good. So I think Manaea, I think Senga, and I think Peterson. But playoffs, take a look at the standings. They are not a lock to make the postseason. And the more they lose, Forget the Phillies. They're still only a game and a half out, but the Brewers are creating room between them. The Cubs are creating room from them in terms of getting that first round bye. Like, it's not as easy as we thought it was, or it's not as organized as we thought it was when it comes to a playoff spot. And I mentioned a lot about tiebreakers. Keep an eye on the Cincinnati Reds. They are right there. And because the Mets have now lost 2 of their first 6 games to Cincinnati, if the Reds can win one more, they at least get a split of the season series, which could push it to the next tiebreaker. So these games matter. Sunday's game with David Peterson on the mound against Abbott, who's been awesome this season, it matters. It's big time. And making the playoffs is not a guarantee. I can't sit here and tell you, oh, yeah, they're a lock to make the playoffs. No, they're not. Doesn't mean I think they're going to miss the playoffs. Maybe I'll get to that point when we do the drunk Rico in the middle of August, which we will still do on my next vacation, which doesn't involve leaving the country, but does involve sitting by the beach and drinking, at least for one day. I'm not a heavy drinker. I don't want anyone to think I drink every day. I actually don't. I'm a lightweight. That's why the drunk Rico is so easy to do. Just give me a couple of shots and I'm drunk. I'm the opposite of Hoff.
Yeah, dude, I need a lot to liquor me up. Hey, by the way, are you going to start asking Sal now and change the question of if the division over, if the Mets are in the playoffs? Like, when is that maybe going to be the turn of the question?
Like, is the playoff race over?
Yeah.
We may get there at some point. I do want to leave you guys with one last email, and it's about David Wright. Are you ready for this one? This is from Nicholas. Nicholas writes, Evan, Pete, you read an email or two of mine on the air. I believe I was moaning about Brandon Nimmo. Okay. David Wright was a very good player. The 2006 home run derby battle with Ryan Howard was epic. However, as we all painfully recall, David fell off in the second half and was a no-show in the playoffs. I would argue he was the main reason for their failure in the NLCS. And ironically, his productive years mostly coincided with those of Ryan Howard, who also fell off a cliff due to injury. Howard, however, contributed significantly during the Phillies' 2 World Series runs. But David hit a homer to get the Mets on the board in their only win of the 2015 World Series, later tacking on a 2-run single in that blowout. What did he do in the 4 losses? 3 for 19 with 0 RBI. Contrast him with an actual Mets playoff hero, Al Weiss, whose regular season stats were almost nil compared to David, but Al rose to the occasion like many otherwise obscure players have done on that grand stage. I like David, but he's not an all-time Met. I'm sorry. He accepted that big contract after 2012 when he likely knew he was hurting. While he played well in 2013, that was only over 112 games. 2014 was a down year, even as he managed 134 games. That was it for him. And then his pathetic final 2 playing years. He then pocketed $35 million for 19 and 20. That should have gone to charity. I'll grant you were at many, if not most of his games, which I saw few of them in person. But I never felt anything approaching the excitement when David stepped to the plate compared to the incomparable Mike Piazza or even Carlos Delgado for that matter. Regards, Nicholas. Well, Nicholas, couple things. Number one, there's no denying the postseason numbers. So I remember arguing with Sal Licata. You mentioned Sal back in 2006. I remember arguing because he blamed David Wright for it. He basically called him the golden boy all the time and put the failures of 2006 on him. I disagreed with him. I think he was a part of the failure. Like, I'm not exonerating him completely, but I do remind you that he drove in the only run in Game 7 of that NLCS against the Cardinals. A little blooper, but hey, it counted. Only guy to drive a run in Game 7 was David Wright. But I can't argue that his numbers in the NLCS were not good. They weren't. Can't argue that. I don't think what you said in 2015 is fair, though, because the 2-run hit against Pedro Baez in Game 1, bases loaded, 2 out, 1-0 lead, the Kershaw game, that was a monstrous hit. The home run against Kansas City, first at-bat, Citi Field, Mets are down 2-0 in the series. He doesn't know they're going to lose in 5. That's a monstrous hit. So I can't kind of downplay his productive playoff moments, but to your point, I mean, his overall playoff numbers are not great. As far as Did he bring the same excitement when he came up as Mike Piazza? Look, Mike Piazza is a Hall of Famer. And there are certain players who, for whatever reason, when they step up to the plate, there is that, I need to watch them. No, David Wright didn't do that. But David Wright went out there and in the prime of his career before injuries, would go play 155 games, play Gold Glove defense at third base, hit close to 300. I remember early in his career, fall behind 0-2. The at-bat was just beginning. Hit for pop, steal a bunch of bases, driving a bunch of runs. Like, he was a really, really good player. If you want to argue he wasn't a great player, fine. He's not going to the Hall of Fame. I think he'll get votes. I don't know if he'll ever get in. I think if he remained healthy, he would have had a better chance at that. But what you're missing, with all due respect, Nicholas, is the value of being a New York Met his entire career. And that's why there is such a connection between David and New York Met fans. No one is suggesting he's perfect. And I think that when you retire a guy's number and you celebrate one's career, yeah, we're not going to sit here and break down how he contributed to the choke of 07 or the collapse of 08 or, like you mentioned, his performance in the NLCS. He was not a perfect player. Were there times, if we were doing the Rico back then, that I would have yelled about David Wright? Of course. I did it with Joe on the air. I can't tell you how many times we'd rip him. Nobody's perfect. And nobody's suggesting that he's the greatest pound-for-pound Met of all time. But I think when you take the fact that he played his entire career here, and there's no debate, like I mentioned at the top, of was he a better Dodger? Was he a better Cardinal? Why did he leave as a free agent? Should they let him on left? Like, there's no debate. He's a career Met. I also think the Al Weiss thing is not fair. Yeah, Al Weiss came up big in the post. So did Ray Knight. What does that mean? I mean, so did Daniel Murphy. I don't think that makes one the better player. Obviously, what you do over the course of a full season, what you do over the course of your full career, that's what makes you a great player. I can't understand if you're arguing that we shouldn't be celebrating David Wright. Of course we should. No one's saying he's perfect. And neither is David, because what I found sad, interesting, and honest from David in his speech was how he admitted he failed not delivering a world championship to Met fans. He said that. And he also said, I wanted it. And I believe this with him more than most other guys. He said, I wanted it as much as you guys did. And I could feel that in him. And ultimately, yes, he did fail at that. And there's a lot of great athletes in this town who, while they're celebrated and their numbers in the rafters, they failed at that ultimate prize. Now, hopefully this team won't, but no question. 2006 and the ending in 2006 is one of the most bitter endings in the history of the Mets. Even the ending in 2015 is one of the most bitter endings in the history of the New York Mets. And he was a part of both of them. But he is a great Met and absolutely deserved to have his number retired. We'll have episode 515 of the Rico recapping this series. We'll pick the Rico star of the series. We'll pick the net negative, and hopefully we'll have a win to be talking about. And I mentioned with the trade deadline, we'll do a big trade deadline Rico Brogna coming up on Thursday, 1 week before the trade deadline. So, of course, you can email us your trade deadline suggestions at thericob@gmail.com. Out of the box, in the box, what have you. And we'll have some fun talking about the trade deadline, which will be very exciting. We appreciate you listening and downloading episode 514 of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.